And he was taken into a tent and was shown some material. And he said he was given instruments, and he had a team with him, and the people in charge said, well, they were in civilian clothes, but he knew they were military because they had that military posture to them. They were probably members of Army intelligence and so on, and Army Air Corps intelligence. And there were a number of scraps of metal, like debris from some type of vehicle, he said. It was definitely some type of aircraft. And that he picked up the pieces, and he had a very large, thick piece in his hand, and it was so light, he said, that he had to press down on it and squeeze it to make sure he wasn't imagining something because the material was so light. And he said it didn't react to a metal detector, and they put enormous amounts of pressure on it and could not bend the metal. And he thought, where did this come from? I mean, he thought at first that it was experimental German technology. And he said, my gosh, if they had something like this, they could have won the war because the bullets would have bounced right off the aircraft. And it was so light, it would practically burn no fuel at all. Then he was taken to an area, an isolated area of that particular tent, and was asked to examine something in there. And he saw what he said looked like the remains of a smashed control panel. And he said, since his background was electrical engineering, he was asked to examine it and, of course, do tests and so on. He took the panel apart, which was made up of a similar metal as to what he calls the outside structure of the aircraft. And he said inside he did not know. This was 1947, remember. He was looking at things, he said, that he had no idea what it was. It was a technology in electronics that was so advanced. But he said, I know what they are today. This was back in 1995. He says, I know what I saw today. I saw what was to be the beginning of our computer chip technology. And he said there was a series of red crystals connecting the circuits, and they were connected to a box that was the size of a cigarette packet. And he said there was a blinking light, sort of LED light on it, and it was sending out a signal at 1.6 gigahertz, which at that time was totally unknown. Today we use it in microwave communication for satellite communication and cell phones. And he said to me, Phil, he said, what I saw there was not from this world. He said, I saw the beginning and that control panel of our computer technology. And he believed to the time of his death that our computer technology, the basics of it, was obtained from an alien technology, and he was convinced that he was taken to an area where a number of debris was taken from the Roswell crash. He said, what I saw at that time, he said, was not from this earth. And there were also a number of other tents which he was not allowed into. You were only allowed into a particular tent that contained something to analyze for your expertise. And he said he saw another tent and he saw someone he knew, and they were biomedical technicians and scientists. And he said, why would they be going in that tent unless they had some type of bodies or tissue or something living? And he said he was convinced that he was taken out to the Roswell crash because the timing was just at that particular time period. Now, the strangest thing, he said, is that he was asked to write a report on what he saw, and he was asked to submit the report. He was debriefed, saying that what he experienced and what he saw was the top and utmost in national security, and the national security clause was said to him that he would be, put in prison prison if he revealed any of this and so on. But he said, usually, he said, after I write a report, they send me a draft to check over. And he said, but no draft came this time. And he said, and the strangest thing, he says, for my services, I usually get a check in the mail. But this time, he said, someone came to his door. It was a civilian with a briefcase, and they paid him in cash. And after hearing that story and the sincerity of this individual and knowing his background and knowing his credentials, I had to reevaluate the idea of what the Roswell crash was and what happened there. And today, my final conclusions after this information is that perhaps indeed a space vehicle from another star system with alien pilots crashed in New Mexico at that time and was retrieved by the United States government, and perhaps a lot of our technology came from the analysis of that particular crash. So to answer the question, I think the Roswell event was real. I'm sure Dr. Hynek knew more about it than he was saying, and today it still remains.
So he was providing disinformation, do you think?
You know, I don't really know, because he was usually very honest with me with everything he had to say. I know he did not investigate Roswell personally. There were things while he was the so-called government consultant, information that he was denied. And many times he was asked to leave a meeting when UFOs were discussed involving encounters with military aircraft and around sensitive military bases. And he was there in a meeting one time with a number of generals and then Secretary Brown, Secretary of Defense, and he was asked to leave the room. And he said, well, why should I leave the room? I'm your scientific consultant on this phenomena. Don't I have the right to know? And they told him, you don't have the right to know. You will leave the room. So he was actually denied information. And he was more or less a front person for the Air Force to satisfy the public that UFOs were being scientifically investigated by one of the nation's top scientists, and the Air Force was taking action. But he said that it was a foul-up. You know, the whole Project Blue Book thing was just a foul-up, and he knew for sure that some of the cases involving certain types of close encounters and sightings around military bases were being channeled to the intelligence organizations, and he was denied that information.
Now, Roswell is possibly the first documented case or supposedly documented case we have. Have you ever come across any other credible accounts of possible UFO crashes?
There are a number of claims, but however, Roswell is the only one in which a witness who came to me, who I know was at one time one of the top engineers in this country, just before his death, had to talk about what he saw back in 1947. And just listening to that convinced me that Roswell was real. But these other claims of UFO crashes, I have not talked to anybody who personally saw it, just a bunch of rumors from people who talked to people who knew somebody in the government that claimed it happened. So my personal experience with Roswell is this account of this individual, and that convinced me that Roswell was real, and that was enough evidence for me that something did take place that was highly unusual. But all the other claims, I have seen no convincing evidence.
Now, you've also very thoroughly researched and written a book on the Hudson Valley UFO sightings, which you mentioned a bit earlier. What was your conclusion of those sightings and all the witness accounts you have?